Yesterday, we named it. Today, we start rebuilding. Because the question after you leave or after you're pushed out is, who am I when I'm not the family's problem? That's what we're answering today. I'd like to take just a brief moment and just welcome you to Elisha's space. If you were here Thursday, this is the conversation. If you're just joining us, catch that question on the replay. Today is about what comes after the truth. Yesterday we talked about Scapegoat's role, family systems, and the true colors of identity. Whether you have play or if you're with me live in the bushes, I'd like for you to kind of ponder and ask yourself, what stayed with you from Thursday? Or what question has been sitting with you since then? You know, some of you may have had a hard night after listening to the replay. And that's what happens when truth surfaces. It moves through the body before it settles in the mind. So, how is your nervous system right now? We're going to go somewhere tender today. So let's arrive regulated. Let's do a deep breath in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. And release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Deep breath in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. And then slowly breathe out through your mouth as if you're blowing through a straw. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. And then release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. And then release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. And let's release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now that we're regulated, let's go forward. While the scapegoat's role is an assigned identity, it's not who you are. It is what you were made to be from the system's protection. Often in dysfunctional family systems, I'm just going to turn off the music. Often in dysfunctional family systems, certain members are given that type of an assignment, that type of a name within that. And it's unconsciously and sometimes consciously done in order to maintain that family's equilibrium or to protect other members from having the accountability and provide a container for that family's collective shame, pain, and dysfunction. The scapegoat is one of the most painful and misunderstood of those roles. If you've been the scapegoat in your family, you likely carry a deep, visceral sense of being wrong, too much, the problem, or fundamentally flawed. You may have spent years or decades trying to prove your worth, fix yourself, or earn a place of belonging that always seemed just out of reach. So, briefly, just kind of going through what the roles can be, it can be you're blamed for the family's problems, conflicts, and dysfunction. You become the target of criticism, anger, and projection. You may be labeled as difficult, too sensitive, the troublemaker, or the problem child. And you're often the one who sees the dysfunction clearly and may speak the truth that others deny, carrying the family's unprocessed shame, trauma, and pain. And you're frequently excluded, marginalized, or exiled, especially when you choose to stop playing the role. And many families create scapegoats as a survival mechanism for that family system. It serves functions for diversion, but by focusing on the problem family member, other members can avoid examining their own behavior or responsibility for what they've done to create the problems within and the dysfunction within that in that family. Its function can also be cohesion. Having a common enemy or an identified person can create a false sense of unity among the other family members who bond over their shared narrative about the scapegoat. And then there's the protection of that status quo. Scapegoats are often the truth tellers, the ones who see and name what others deny, and silencing or discrediting them protects the family's illusions. And with that scapegoat, the other family members can discharge their shame. So, a lot of dysfunctional families often carry enormous collective shame. So, placing it on one member allows them to feel good or normal by comparison. And the repetition of trauma, especially in families that have intergenerational trauma, the scapegoat may repeat patterns from previous generations where someone was also cast out or blamed. So if you were the scapegoat, you learned early that your perceptions were wrong, your feelings were too much, your needs were a burden, your presence was the problem, and your worth was conditional, and the conditions were impossible to meet. And you may have internalized messages like, if I were just different, they would love me. I must be fundamentally broken. I am too much and never enough at the same time. I don't deserve to belong. Maybe they're right about me. And these messages can become part of your internal operating system, not because they were true, but because you were a child who needed to make sense of an unsafe environment. And so believing you were the problem gave you a sense of control. If I'm the problem, maybe I can fix it. Maybe I can earn love. But here is the truth that you probably weren't told. You were not the problem. You were one the problem was actually put on. So I have identified three pillars of reclaiming who you are. I kind of call it identity reconstruction. And that is the process of separating that assigned role from your true self, where you're reconnecting with who you were before that actual assignment and anchoring your identity in something that the family system could not control. And this work rests on three foundational pillars. So, one pillar is separating the role from self. That is the family's narrative about you, that it's not evidence, it is a survival strategy. The first and most critical step in identity reconstruction is learning to distinguish between the role you were assigned and the person you actually are. For years, you may have believed that the family story about you was your identity. If they said you were selfish, you searched for evidence of your selfishness. If they said you were too sensitive, you learned to distrust your own emotions. If they said you were the cause of family conflict, you carried that guilt for simply existing. But consider this: a narrative that is repeated by multiple people is not automatically true, it is simply shared. So, dysfunctional families are systems, and systems tell stories to survive. The story about you being the problem was functional for them. It allowed them to pretty much just avoid accountability. It allowed them to stay in a state of denial. It allowed them to protect the family image and discharge those uncomfortable emotions they were feeling and preserve the unhealthy power dynamics. The family's narrative about you was never a reflection of your worth, it was a reflection of their need. I'm just going to check the chat and see if there was any questions or if someone has a question about anything. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I mean, it would help if I did this. Okay. So here is an affirmation for you to hold on to. The story of my family that my family told about me was not evidence of my character. It was the strategy for their survival. I am not who they said I was. I am who I've always been underneath. So I'm going to put this affirmation in a banner for you to refer to and hold on to. And if you want to create a screenshot of it, that is what you hold on to. Okay. Now, pillar number two. Pillar number two is returning to what was true about you before the assignment. You know, who you were at 7 years old before you learned that you were the problem, that little girl or little boy was still there. So before the scapegoat role was assigned, before you learned to see yourself through the family's distorted lens, there was a child who existed before the wounding. And this child had natural curiosity and wonder, authentic emotions and desires, a sense of self that was not yet shaped by shame, and give preferences and a unique way of being in the world, an inherent worthiness that required no earning. And that scapegoat role often develops gradually. It may have solidified during specific periods, or perhaps when you started expressing your own opinions, when you reached adolescence, when you began to see family dysfunction clearly, or when you stopped complying with the family's unspoken rules. But before the solidification, there was a true self, the person that you were created to be, that was unmarked by the role. And the inner child that is beneath that role is it has to have healing. It's required reconnect with their younger self. Not to say stuck in the past, but to reclaim what was true before it was buried under those narratives. So consider who you were before you were told you were too much. Was there a child whose emotional intensity was a gift, a capacity for depth, passion, and empathy? You know, before you were labeled the problem, was there a child whose perceptiveness allowed them to see what others could not or would not see? Before you were called difficult, there was a child whose boundaries and sense of justice were intact, a child who knew when something was wrong. And before you were exiled, there was a child who belonged simply by existing. And that child is still with you. That child was not destroyed. That child was hidden for protection. And the child is waiting to be found. It's waiting to be validated. And it's waiting to be welcomed home. I give a common exercise for other people to do. um, where you write a letter to your younger self. And many people find this healing. You find a quiet space, you regulate your nervous system by taking a few deep breaths, and then write a letter to yourself at that age when you first began to feel like you were the problem. It can sound like, dear, and then your name, of course. I know you started to believe something about yourself that isn't true. And I know that people around you are making you feel like you are the reason those things are hard. And I want you to know I wish someone had told you then. And then write whatever it is you need to hear. Speak to that person with a compassion and clarity that no one offered you at that time. Here is an affirmation for you. Before I was assigned this role, I was already whole. The child I was, curious, sensitive, perceptive, alive, is still in me. I am not returning to weakness. I am returning to truth. And I will put this affirmation in on as well. That is for you. And if you want to screenshot that, you can and keep that. And as many times as you have to speak that over yourself, please do. The third pillar is knowing who you are and your true identity that the family can't touch. You know, for those of you who are in the faith-based world, what God says about you is not subject to what a family says about you. It doesn't get a vote. For those who seek healing through that faith framework, there's a profound anchor that's available, an identity that is rooted in God's declaration rather than the family's verdict. The family system operates on conditional belonging. I need to get something to drink. Just one moment. Worth is assigned based on compliance, role performance, and the maintenance of the system's illusions. In this economy, love is earned and identity is controlled. But God's economy operates differently. In the divine framework, identity is not earned, it is declared. Worth is not assigned by the group, it is inherent. And belonging is not conditional, it is covenant. This means that the family's narrative about you, no matter how long it had been repeated, no matter how many members believe it, no matter how deeply you have internalized it, it has no authority over what God says. What God says about you cannot be voted on. What God says about you cannot be revised by family consensus. What God says about you is not pending approval. It is finished, it is declared, and it is settled. An anchor, a scriptural anchor that I often hold on to for myself is Isaiah chapter 43, verse 1. But now this is what the Lord says about you. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. And that is the NIV version. So let's sit with this verse, and I'll put it up so that you can see it as well. With the I have summoned you by name, God does not call you by the names your family gives you. He does not say, you are the difficult one. You are the problem. You are too much. You are the reason we suffer. He says, I have called you by name. You're not the role. You're not the label. You're not the projection. Your true name, the one that existed before the assignment. In Hebrew culture, a name was not just an identifier, it was an identity, a destiny, a declaration of essence. To be called by name was to be known, chosen, claimed. God calls you by what is true about you, not what's assigned to you. He says, "You are mine." This is the identity that holds. Not you are your family's problem. Not you are your role. Not you are what they said. You are mine. And this is identity that cannot be taken by family exile. It cannot be erased by scapegoating. It cannot be voted away by sibling consensus or parental rejection. When the family says you are out, God says you are mine. When the family says you are the problem, God says you are mine. When the family says you are not welcome, God says you are mine. This is the identity that holds when all other identities crumble. Another scripture that I find very helpful is Psalms 139, verse 14. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And Jeremiah 1 5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ. And let's not forget Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 17. The Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. I'm just going to check to see if I have any comments. Okay. All right. I was just checking to see if I got any more visitors or if there were any comments, but I'm just going to keep it pushing. So there is a grief that doesn't have a funeral. It's a loss that has no casket, a death that happens while everyone is breathing. And it is one of the loneliest experiences a human being can endure. If you have experienced family exile, whether through estrangement, going no contact, being scapegoated, or being slowly pushed out of your family system, you carry a grief that most people do not understand and few acknowledge and almost no one validates. And this is not the grief of death that the world recognizes. There's no obituary, no memorial services, no community gathering to bring you food and hold your hand, no socially sanctioned time to mourn. And yet you are mourning. You're mourning people who are still alive. You are mourning a family that still exists, just not for you. You're mourning holidays that will happen without you. You're mourning a childhood that should have been different. You are mourning the mother that you deserved but you didn't get. You're mourning the siblings who chose the system over you. You're mourning a version of yourself that believed it could still work. This grief is real. This grief is valid. This grief deserves to be named, honored, and held with reverence. So let's go into understanding what this type of loss is. I call it there is a term called an ambiguous loss. And this ambiguous loss was developed by Dr. Pauline Boss, a family therapist and researcher who spent decades studying grief that does not fit neatly into the traditional framework of death and mourning. Ambiguous loss occurs when there is no clear resolution or closure, when someone is physically present but psychologically absent, or physically absent but psychologically present. Now, there are two types. The type where they're physically absent with psychological presence is known to be gone physically, but you continue to hold them in your heart, your mind, and your daily life. And those examples can be a missing person that wasn't found, a family member who's been estranged or exiled, a loved one who has been immigrated to another place, or and you know that they're away from you, but that they're still alive. You know, so there's all those things that's there. I'm just taking a moment just to check. And in these cases, that person isn't dead, but they are not here. You may still think of them daily, still hope for reconciliation, still wonder what they're doing. They occupy space in your psyche, even though they're absent from you. And then the second type is the psychological absence of physical presence, where this person is physically present, but they're gone psychologically. So maybe that's a parent with dementia, a family member with severe mental illness, a parent who's emotionally unavailable, a sibling who's present at family gatherings but treats you as you're invisible. In those cases, the body's there, but the person you need, the relationship you long for, the connection you deserved is absence. And for those who have experienced family exile, the grief often contains elements of both types. Your family members are physically absent from your daily life. You may not see them, speak to them, or be included in the gatherings, but they are psychologically present. You're in your thoughts, your memories, your internal dialogues, your triggers, your holidays, and your dreams. And then simultaneously, the family you wished you had, the loving, supportive, safe family, was never physically present in the way you needed, but that wish for family has been psychologically present your entire life. That gives you that longing, a hope, and ache, a fantasy you could not let go of. And that creates a double bind of grief. You're mourning people who are still alive. You're mourning a family that never fully existed. You're mourning a loss that has no clear beginning, no clear ending, and no social script. And it's very difficult because ambiguous loss, it doesn't have closure. There's no death certificate, no funeral, no ending that allows the grief process to move forward in a linear way. It's ongoing. The loss is not a single event, it's a chronic condition. Every holiday, every milestone, every family related trigger reopens the wound, and it creates frozen grief. Without closure, many people get stuck in the grief process and they're unable to fully mourn, unable to fully move on, and it lacks social validation. Society does not recognize this loss as real grief, which leads to isolation and shame. And it is cognitively confusing. The brain struggles to categorize the loss. Is this person dead or alive? Is this person gone or still here? Is this a, re- a real loss or is it recoverable? And it invites hope and despair simultaneously because the person is still alive. You hope for reconciliation or change that can persist, even when evidence suggests it is unlikely. And this hope can be both sustaining as well as tormenting. The pain that you can experience is one of the least supported forms of grief, especially in the church. You know, when someone dies, the grief is clear. The person is gone, the loss is final, the community gathers, the rituals begin, and the casseroles arrive. But when you grieve a living person, maybe, um, a mother who is still breathing, but you can no longer safely speak to, a sibling who's alive but who has cut you off, a father who exists somewhere in the world but who has never been emotionally present, that grief is invisible. And there's no funeral to attend, there's no gravesite to visit, there's no anniversary or death to mark. There's only the ongoing, shapeless ache of a loss that has no clear container. And because it is ongoing, that and because that person is still alive, well-meaning people will say, well, at least they're still alive. There's still hope. Have you tried reaching out? Maybe you should be the bigger person. Family is family. You should forgive. You'll regret this when they're gone. These responses, however well intentioned, it denies the reality of your experience. It suggests that the relationship is recoverable, that you are somehow responsible for the distance, and that your grief is premature or unwarranted. But your grief is not premature and it is not unwarranted. The death of a relationship can be just as real and just as devastating as the grief of the body. Let me go further in talking about this type of grief. That disenfranchised grief is a term coined by grief researcher Dr. Kenneth Doka. It refers to grief that is not openly acknowledged, it's not validated, and it is not publicly mourned. In other words, it's a grief that society will not allow you to have. And the disenfranchised grief occurs when the relationship is not recognized, whether it's an estrangement, chosen family, ex partners, it's not acknowledged. And it's not, you as the griever are not recognized. And the circumstances tend to be stigmatized around it, right? And family exile creates disenfranchised grief on multiple levels. Society, it doesn't recognize the estrangement. The person is still alive, so the grief is not as legitimate as if the person were no longer here. And the griever, you are often blamed. Like, what did you do to cause this? And the circumstances that involve those family conflict, whether it's stigmatized or minimized. The isolating reality of all of this is that people rally around when someone dies, but when you've had to walk away from a living family, there are no casseroles or no cards. It's just the assumption that you're fine. And to add to that, when someone dies, people send flowers, they bring food, they'll call and check on you, they'll give you time off of work, they'll be understanding and say, it's okay if you need to cry. They'll gather at the funeral and say, I'm so sorry for your loss. But when you lose a family that's still alive, no one sends flowers, no one brings food, no one checks up on you. There is no bereavement leave, there's no public ritual, and there's no community to gather to witness your grief. So instead, there's silence, there's confusion, there's judgment, there's unsolicited advice, and the assumption that you're fine because they're still alive. So you find yourself grieving alone. You grieve in secret. You grieve without the witnesses, without the validation, without the comfort of a community that understands. And this isolation compounds the grief. It makes you wonder if your pain is legitimate. It makes you question whether you have the right to mourn. And so I tell you that you do. For those of you within faith communities, the experience of disenfranchised grief can be even more painful because churches are often built on the value of family. So sermons extol the importance of honoring your parents. Holidays center on family gatherings. And the assumption is that everyone has a family and that families with enough prayer and forgiveness can be healed. And this creates a context where estrangement is seen as a failure to forgive, a failure to recognize, a failure to be Christian enough. And the person who walks away from family is often viewed as the problem. The complexity of abuse, the scapegoating, and the toxic dynamic is oversimplified into just forgive and move on. There are no rituals, no prayers, no pastoral support specifically for those grieving a living family. And when you are in a state of ambiguous loss, the grieving someone who is still alive, it is one of the most least supported forms of grief that's out there within the church. And if you have experienced the silence from your faith community, you're not alone, and your grief is still sacred. God does not require you to stay in relationships that harm you in order to be faithful. And God does not ask you to sacrifice your well being on the altar of family. God sees the grief you carry, even when the church does not. So let's move on a little bit and discuss the specific griefs of family exile. Family exile is not a single loss, it is a cascade of losses, some obvious, some hidden, and some that only reveal themselves over time. So let's go ahead and name some of those specific griefs that accompany those experiences. You grieve the family you wish you had. This is perhaps the most painful and most hidden grief. The loss of a family that never fully existed but you always hoped for. So you could be mourning the mother who would have protected you, the father who would have been present and proud, the siblings who would have stood with you, the family gatherings that would have been warm and safe, the childhood that should have been marked by security, not survival, the parents who would have seen you, known you, and delighted in you. This is a grief for a fantasy, but that does not make it less real. The longing for the family you deserved is a legitimate loss. The hope that things would be one day be different is a legitimate death. And then let's discuss the grief of the relationship. When you're in the state of the collateral damage, I like to say, when your family exile occurs, those primary relationships are not the only ones affected. You may lose your siblings, your extended families, your nieces and your nephews who you can't see anymore, your grandparents who are caught in the middle of all this, your in laws who were once family but are now strangers, and your family friends who disappeared when the exile began. Now, while those are secondary losses, but they are no less painful. Each one represents a relationship that was severed, not because of anything between you and the person, but because of the family system's dynamics. So you may grieve that niece who doesn't know who you are. You may grieve that cousin you grew up with who no longer returns your calls, or the grandmother who you'll never have closure with, a sibling who was once your closest ally but chose silence. And then there's the third. There's the grief of holidays and milestones and ordinary events. Family exile does not announce itself only in major holidays, it shows up in the major holidays too, like for Thanksgiving, the milestones, the weddings you aren't invited to, the graduations that you don't attend. And then there's the ordinary moments where you see other families at the grocery store, or you hear a friend complain about their annoying but their loving mother, watching a commercial that assumes everyone has a family to go home to. And while those moments are triggers, not because you're weak, but because they're reminders of what you have lost and what others have taken for granted. And then lastly, there's the grief of self, of who you were before the exile. You may grieve the version of yourself that existed before the final rupture, the person who still believed reconciliation was possible, the person who still tried to earn love, the person who still hoped that one more conversation, one more effort, one more attempt would fix it, the person who had not yet faced the full truth. And letting go of that hope is its own death. The moment you stop trying, not because you didn't care, but because you finally accepted the truth, something inside you died. And that death is worthy of grief. And I thought that was the last one, but there's more. I'm sorry. Um, I think I'm going to stop at at that place because I have a lot of notes on this, right? And I think I'm going to get to the part where we can do a guided grief naming exercise. Now, grief that goes unnamed has nowhere to go. It circulates in the body, the mind, and the spirit. It's unprocessed, unwitnessed, and unintegrated. So let's take a moment to just name your grief. And it's not about dwelling in the pain, it's about giving your loss the dignity of acknowledgement. So when you name what you lost, you're validating your experience. You're breaking the isolation of that silent grief. You're putting it in a container for the pain, and you're beginning the process of integration while honoring the truth of what happened. So I want you to write just one word for what you lost, not your family member's name, just what you lost: the belonging, the holidays, the mother, the normal. Now, complete this sentence as many times as you need to. I lost. And then write one word at a time and let each word have its own space. Here are some common words that I hear in the counseling practice to kind of help you: belonging, safety, mother, Christmas, siblings, hope, my niece, being seen, being believed, peace. There is no right answer, there's only your truth. If you're doing that exercise alone, read your words aloud, slowly. And let's take a moment to acknowledge that those are real losses. It deserves to be named, they deserve to be witnessed. And I thank you for joining me in Elisha's space, for trusting the space with your grief. Now let's do a somatic exercise because grief lives in the body. It is stored in tight shoulders, shallow breathing, clenched jaws, heavy chest, and tears that never fell. So, for many of you who've experienced family exile, the body learned early that grief was not safe to express. And you may have been told directly or indirectly that your feelings were too much, that crying was a weakness, that expressing pain brought more pain. And so the grief was held, it was contained, it was suppressed. Somatic grief is the practice of inviting the body to participate in the mourning, to finally release what has been held for so long. This is not about forcing tears or manufacturing emotion. It is about creating permission and space for whatever the body needs to express. So let's make sure that you're in a safe, private space, that you have your tissues, your bank blanket, or a comforting object nearby. And know that you can stop at any time. You are in control of this process. You understand that whatever arises is valid. So let's go ahead and feel the support of your chair, your floor, or what is beneath you. Put one hand on your heart and place the other hand on your stomach. And then we'll take a slow breath for a count of 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. And then release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, with your eyes closed or softened, let's bring to mind one of the losses. Not everyone, but just one word. Notice where it lands: in your chest, your throat, your stomach. Are you having any tightness, numbness? Where does this grief feel like. And you don't have to fix it, just notice it. Now give yourself permission. I give myself permission to feel this grief. I do not have to hold this alone anymore. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. And then release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's do that breath again. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. And then release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you're having tears, let it come. Anger, let it move. You might clench your fists. You might need to shake your hands. Numbness, that's okay. Your body's protecting you. Just trust the timing. If you're shaking, this is the body's natural way of releasing stored stress. Whatever it arises or does not arise, it is exactly the right moment for this time. I'm just going to get ready to do a quick check to see what's going on in the chat because I can't see the chat. Hey, Savdal, how are you? It's so good to see you. So now let's look at the rebuilding. We're moving from scapegoat survival to an authentic living. And when we understand what is happening, when you understand what is happening to you, that's the first step. But healing is not complete until the understanding becomes embodied, until the new identity is not just something you know, but something you live. We took a moment to name the wound. We've recognized the scapegoat role. You've begun to separate the family's narrative from your true self, and you've grieved and are still grieving the losses that accompany that family exile. But now comes the question that every survivor eventually asks: what now? What does a rebuilt identity actually look like, practically daily in daily life? And this is not an abstract question. It's urgent, concrete, and deeply personal. So take a moment to ponder. What does it look like to belong when your family of origin rejected you? What does it look like to trust when trust has been weaponized against you? What does it look like to know who you are when you spent decades being told you were someone you're not? And what does it look like to build a life not organized around earning love or proving worth? One of the first parts of this is you start to build your community as a chosen family. God designed us for belonging. And if the family of origin can't provide it, we build it. Human beings are not designed for isolation. We are neurobiologically, psychologically, and spiritually wired for connection. From the moment of birth, our nervous systems are shaped by relationship. Our sense of self develops in the mirror of others' faces. Our capacity for regulation, trust, and intimacy is formed or fractured in the context of early attachment. So, when the family of origin fails to provide safe belonging, The wound is not merely emotional, it is existential. It touches the deepest questions of your identity. You wonder, do I matter? Am I lovable? Is there a place for me? Can I be known and still accepted? And for those who've been scapegoated in exile, the answer the family gave to those questions, but no, but that family's answer is not the final answer. So let's talk about the chosen family, because this refers to relationships we intentionally build and cultivate. Relationships are not based on biological connection, but on mutual care, respect, safety, and commitment. So, our chosen family could include our close friends who've become like siblings, mentors who offer parental guidance and wisdom, our faith community who treat you as like your kin, support group members who understand your journey, your neighbors, your colleagues, or others who've become a home to you, a safe place. It could also be your counselor or therapist who provides consistent, safe presence over time, or your spouse or partner. It could be that person as well. Just check in the chat briefly, just a moment. Yes, it is heavy stuff. Yes, it is heavy stuff, but it's good stuff. Your chosen family is not a consolation prize, and it's not settling because you couldn't have a real family. Chosen family is real family. It's a family built on choice rather than obligation, on authenticity rather than role performance. So, building your chosen family is essential, especially if you're a scapegoat survivor, because building your chosen family serves as several critical functions. It corrects the relationship experience. The wounds of the family exile were created in relationship, and it must be healed in relationship. When you experience safe, consistent, attuned connection with others, when you're seen, accepted, and valued for who you truly are, your nervous system begins to learn a new template. The brain's implicit beliefs, I am wanted, I am too much, I will be rejected, it becomes rewritten through repeated experiences of the opposite. And this is not a about finding people who will never disappoint you. It's about finding people who stay, who repair those ruptures, who show up consistently, who will prove over time that their belonging is possible. And chosen family also provides witnesses for you in your life. They see your growth, they celebrate your wins, they hold space for your grief. You know, after years of having your reality denied by your family of origin, this witnessing is a profound healing. You need people who say, I see what you survived. You are not what they said you were. I am proud of you and you belong here. Those are the types of wordings you need to hear, and it provides a secure base for risk taping and a secure attachment base, whether from family or of origin or chosen family. It provides the foundation from which we can take risks, we can try new things, and we can tolerate failure. When you know someone has your back, you can venture further into the world. And for those who grew up without the space, building chosen family creates the safety net that allows you to live more boldly, more authentically, and more freely. And it also is an interruption of isolation. Scapegoats often become deeply isolated, partly because of the family's rejection, and partly because of internalized shame that makes connection feel dangerous. When you're building chosen family, interrupts this isolation and it creates a counter narrative. I am not alone. I do have people and I do belong. If building a chosen family was easy, and I know it's not, then it would have been easily done. The reality is that relational trauma makes connection difficult. Because if you're struggling with hypervigilance, self sabotage, people pleasing, distrust just in general, shame and isolation, those are not character flaws, but they are adaptive responses to a family system that taught you that connection was unsafe. So healing requires gentle, gradual, repeated challenging of those patterns. And it takes small relational risks, building trust incrementally, and allowing yourself to be imperfect within that relationships. So here are some practical steps for building your chosen family. First, identify for what safe connection feels like. So before you can build on safe relationships, you need to know what safety feels like. And reflect on, have you ever felt truly safe with another person? And what was that like? What qualities make someone feel safe to you? And what are your non negotiables, whether it be in a friendship? Is it honesty? Is it consistency? Is it respect? And you can kind of like create a safety inventory, which is like a list of traits and behaviors that signal, okay, this is a safe person. And use that as a guide when evaluating new or existing connections. The second step I suggest is that you start small. You don't need to find a best friend or soul tribe overnight. Just start with small, low stakes connections. Maybe it's a coworker that you enjoy talking to, a neighbor who waves at you and says hello, an online community of people with shared interests or experience, a regular at the coffee shop or the gym. Those small connections build your relational muscles, and it teaches your nervous system that not all people are are dangerous. And then number three is you want to practice your vulnerability. Um, you want to practice your vulnerability. Hey, at Sunshine 19975, it's good to see you. Welcome. You want to practice your vulnerability gradually. Authentic connection requires vulnerability, but vulnerability should be um, um, done in increments. You don't want to flood it. You know, as a matter of fact, it's very common to be careful, especially if you are a scapegoat person that's healing, to do it that way. You share something small and you see how that person responds. If they respond with care and respect, share a little bit more. And if they dismiss, if they minimize, if they weaponize your sharing, take note and then proceed with caution. Trust is earned incrementally, it's given small. It's not like all at one time. And you want to be careful that you're not oversharing, because oversharing can be a trauma response. I have to be careful with my words. A fourth step is to invest in within those reciprocal relationships. Healthy relationships are mutual. So look for connections where you're both initiating contact, where both people are listening and sharing. There is a give and a take. Both parties are showing up reliably. If you find yourself always giving and never receiving, the relationship may not be sustainable. And then also, the next step, step five, is consider formal communities. Chosen family often grows out of shared contacts. So consider joining maybe a small group or faith community, a support group for estrangement, trauma, grief, whatever you're feeling like you need support. A hobby group, that could be a book club, a hiking group, an art class, a volunteer organization, a 12 step or recovery community, or an online community for scapegoat survivors. Those settings provide natural opportunities for connection with people who have shared values or experiences. Step six, and this is the last step on how to build your chosen family, is let it take time. Chosen family is not built in a month or a year, it's cultivated over seasons of shared experience, mutual support, and tested trust. You just have to be patient with the process and be patient with yourself. So let me ask you, who in your life currently feels like chosen family and what makes them feel safe? That's something for you to ponder. Here is an affirmation I want to share with you. And this affirmation is about belonging. You were designed for belonging. The family you came from could not provide what it needed, but that does not mean that you were destined for isolation. You are capable of building safe, authentic, mutual connection. You deserve relationships where you're seen, valued, and accepted. And chosen family is real family that you are and that you are building yours. So I'm going to put this here that you can screenshot. Yes, which is yes, Sunshine 19975, which is why you want to go ahead and when you're building your chosen family, you want to do it in small um, settings, small places. You want to do it incrementally. You don't want to share too much. You don't want to share too much. And when they show that they can handle that, when they show that they can provide you with that, then you can share a little bit more. Okay, well, you know they're a safe person, but you don't want to overshare because oversharing can be a trauma response, right? And a lot of times, what we're talking about, if you come from a background where you've been the truth teller, when you've been um, when you have been the the scapegoat within the family, it can take time. But if you just share a little bit and see how they respond to that, then you can share a little bit more if you're feeling like that's a safe place. So, I also strongly suggest that you do some healing work, right? There is a myth that, oh, I can do this alone. And it's a pervasive myth, especially for those who survived family trauma. And that healing can be accomplished through sheer willpower, self help, prayer, all those things, right? But the myth is understandable. If you grew up in a family where you couldn't rely on others, you learned to be self sufficient. You became your own parent, your own protector, really like your own everything. So asking for help can feel dangerous because help either didn't come or it came with strings attached. Here's a hard truth: the wounds of relational trauma cannot be healed outside of relationship, and the depth of scapegoat wounding typically requires professional support. And it's not because you're weak, it's because our trauma is stored in the body and within the nervous system, and not just the conscious mind. And internalized shame distorts that self perception in ways that are difficult to see alone. Family system dynamics are complex and often require trained eyes to help you untangle. And the healing work can surface overwhelming emotions that need skilled containment. So you deserve a consistent, trained, attuned witness to your healing journey. Someone who's affirming to you and is hearing what you have to say. I'm just taking a moment because I have so much going on here just to see if anyone has any questions or anything, any comments in the chat. Because I know I'm giving a lot. And this is heavy stuff. It's very heavy. So I just want to affirm you and say that you're not who they made you. You're not the problem that they needed you to be. You're the one who was brave enough to tell the truth, and you're rebuilding. And that is not weakness. It is one of the bravest things that you can ever do. let those words land, not as a platitude, not as like, a motivational, you know, thing, and not as something that you nod at and then forget. Let it land in your body in the places that still carry the weight of the family narrative, and the chest that tightens when you wonder if they were right about you. Maybe the stomach that goes in knots when you think about the holidays. In the shoulders that you have borne decades of misplaced blame. You are not who they made you. When they called you a scapegoat, you didn't volunteer for that role. You didn't raise your hand and say, "Oh, I'll be that thing. I'll be the family's problem. I'll carry the dysfunction. I'll be the one blamed so others can remain blameless." You were made into it. And it happened slowly or perhaps suddenly, but it still happened. Maybe it was because you were too sensitive and sensitivity threatened a family that couldn't handle emotion. Maybe it was because you were perceptive and you saw what no one else was willing to see. Maybe it was because you spoke truth in a system that was built on denial. Maybe it was because you existed at the wrong time after a loss during a crisis when a parent was struggling and they needed someone to blame. But somewhere along the way, the family needed a container for its pain, and you were chosen, you were shaped, and you were made into the problem. Not because you were the problem, but because they needed you to be. And understanding that distinction is essential because the scapegoat role is not about who you actually are, it's about what the system needed. Dysfunctional families are systems that are in distress. They carry unprocessed grief, unhealed trauma, unacknowledged um, problems that exist within the family because they don't want to face it and they don't want to deal with it for multiple reasons. But that is not okay, and that is not you. You don't have to carry that anymore. You can let that go because what they said about you isn't true. What they said about you isn't real. It was a narrative that they created within their own dysfunction. So you're not a problem. Everyone has imperfections. You may have made some mistakes. Everybody does. You may have had time been difficult or struggling as a human being, but you're still not the problem. You're not that identified patient that I spoke about yesterday. You were needed to be the problem. That was functional for them. And here's what I find amazing about scapegoats because they are the truth tellers. They see the dysfunction and they name it. They're typically the most healthiest person in the room, really, when it comes to the dysfunctional families. And in a system that's built on secrecy, um, trying to do things with a certain image and unspoken agreements, it's dangerous for you to be the truth teller. You became a threat, and you may have been punished for it, called too sensitive, labeled dramatic, but it didn't make you wrong when they said those things. It just made you inconvenient to a system that they couldn't tolerate. You're brave enough to tell the truth. And now you're in this rebuilding phase. Yes, now you're in this rebuilding phase. You're not destroyed, you're not done, you're not defined by their narrative, you're rebuilding. You're coming out of the rubble of what was supposed to be a family. You're picking up the pieces and sorting through what's true and what was projection, what is yours to carry, and what was never yours at all. It's not glamorous, it's slow, painful work. And some days you can barely lift the next stone, and some days you question whether it's worth it. Some days you might wonder if you should just go back to the old structure because it was familiar. But you're still here, you're still rebuilding, You're still showing up, and that's not a small thing. From the outside, the world might misunderstand your journey. They might say, oh, she can't or he can't get along with their family. They're estranged from everyone. They may have done something wrong to deserve it. They should just forgive and move on. But from the outside, the one who walks away, who sets the boundaries, who refuses to perform, it can look like you're the problem. But you know the truth, and that's what matters. Walking away from that, it requires you to be the problem, and it's not a weakness. Setting boundaries is not being cruel, and grieving is not self pity. You're rebuilding your identity from the rubble of other people's projections, and it's not a failure. I consider scapegoats who are in the process of rebuilding to be some of the most bravest individuals who've ever walked this planet, because it takes courage to reject a narrative that was repeated by every authority figure you ever had, and trusting your own perceptions when everyone told you that you were wrong. Grieving people who are still alive, that's hard. And keep showing up when no one is applauding for you and saying, I see you. It's not weakness, it's strength. It's survival, it's bravery, and it's sacred work. So let's do a declaration over ourselves, right? So if you're able to close your eyes and touch your chest, touch your shirt, or however you're going to do that, and place your hand on your heart, and then just breathe deeply and hear these words not as information but as a declaration as I speak them over you. You are not who they made you. Deep breath. You are not the problem they needed you to be. Deep breath. You are not the one who was brave enough to tell. You are the one who was brave enough to tell the truth. Breathe. You are rebuilding. Breath. That is not weakness. Breath. You are one of the most bravest individuals that has ever walked this planet. Breath. And let that land, let it settle, and let it take root. I'm going to give you a challenge that is to do one thing that is purely unapologetically who you are. Not for family, not to prove anything, just because it's you. Because when you're in a place of identity reconstruction, it's about living differently. The role required you when you were a scapegoat to contort yourself. It required you to perform and to shrink and to accommodate. You learn to filter your choices and question, how will this be perceived, and will this conform to their narrative? And a lot of times when you leave that family system, those patterns persist. And maybe it can look like that through people pleasing because you're making decisions based on what you think others expect. Maybe you're avoiding anything that might draw criticism. Maybe you're living for an approval that will never come. And that's the residue of the role, because it lives in your body, your habits, and your automatic choices. So breaking free requires practice. It's a deliberate act of being unapologetically you. You're not performing and you're not earning anything. So just do one thing that's you. You're not trying to meet an expectation. You're not trying to prove you changed. You're not trying to demonstrate anything. It's just because who you are, without shrinking, without going to a place of self depreciation, without explaining, just because you want to. And it's not about grand gestures, it can be a small, authentic act of self expression. So maybe you want to do something like paint. Maybe you want to dance in your living room to music that you love. Maybe you want to wear an outfit that you were told was too much, right? Maybe you want to go away and do a little short day trip that's just for you, or check out a movie. Maybe you want to try a hobby that you truly enjoyed but you abandoned because it was criticized. I hope I'm giving you some ideas, right? And the purpose of this is not about self indulgence, but it's about identity practice. So when you do that one thing, you're reclaiming you. And then I want you to come back and just name what you did so that you can be honored within this space. Okay? So that you can be honored within this space. All right. So we're going to do a short prayer and a grounding exercise because I gave you guys some heavy, heavy information in this live. If you enjoyed this and you're questioning about yesterday, I would suggest you look at yesterday talk as well because this is the part 2, right? So let's do the short prayer. Father, we bring the rebuilders, the ones who lost family that they needed and had to find themselves in the rubble. We ask you to be the father that was missing, be the mother, the sibling, the witness. Fill those spaces that were hollowed out and let the identity that you gave them, that you assigned them before the foundation of the world, be the one that stands. In your precious and holy name we pray. Amen. Let's do a grounding practice. Notice where you are. If your feet are on the floor, press them down gently and notice the solidarity beneath you. Take a deep breath in through your nose, 2, 3, 4, and then out through your mouth. Slowly place your hand on your heart and feel your heart beat. You are alive. You are here. You are held. Take a moment to look around the room and name 3 things you see so you can get oriented to the present. We spoke about some hard things regarding the past. So let your body know it's safe in its present state. And if you felt any emotions, let it be. You don't need to perform a response. Just notice they're there, whatever is valid. And here's the affirmation to carry forward. I am not who they made me. I am not the problem they needed me to be. I am the one who was brave enough to tell the truth, and I am rebuilding. This is not weakness. This is one of the bravest things a human being can do. I am held. I am seen. I am loved. And the identity God assigned me before the foundation of the world is the one that stands. Okay. So I thank you for joining me today. You have no idea how much it means to me. Tomorrow is our community rest, our EST session at 2. Bring any questions you may have from the week as we close the week out together. See you at the next live, guys. Bye-bye.